Hello, everyone, and welcome to Community Force webinar. My name is Mehreen Mirza, and I will be facilitating today's session. I'll also be answering questions during our dedicated Q&A breaks. There will be two throughout this session. So please do not hesitate to ask any questions throughout the session because I will be answering those questions in the background. And we want to make this session as interactive as possible. Also with me is our amazing Christine Smith, who will be our trainer for today and will walk us through all of the key areas under today's topic. Okay, so while everyone else is joining, okay, let us go over a few key features that will help you make this webinar a little bit more productive. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a panel with an orange arrow. You can use this arrow to expand or collapse the panel. Also, in this panel, you also have the question area. Now you can ask a question, type it in the question area, click on send or enter. We will try our best to answer as many questions during the Q&A break, but if we happen to skip or miss any questions, we'll get back to you after the webinar via email with our answers. Also, a PDF copy of today's presentation is available in the handout section in the same panel. Click on the handout title to download it. This handout also includes help guides, individual help guides, knowledge-based articles, and links to all the topics that we are covering today. For a smooth experience, we have put everyone on mute to reduce any background noise. Since most of you have joined, let's just see. Okay, yep, right. We have everyone on the call. Let's get started. The topic for today is application rollover for the one-to-many application process. The duration of today's webinar can be 1.5 hours, but it could be less than 1.5 hours. So just preparing you at the beginning itself, it can go over 1 hour. With that being said, I'll hand over the mic to Christine. All yours, Christine. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
And thank you so much, Maureen, for getting us started on today's presentation. So to go ahead and get started, again, just a brief introduction. We're going to be covering today a brief overview of how to roll over your application process. And that's when you're starting a new application cycle. You have a one-to-many application process. So that's one application with a multiple funding sources attached. So we're going to talk about how to update your funding source for each new cycle, as well as how to clone that application. And then once you've cloned it, of course, each cycle you probably realize, okay, had best practices or lessons learned from the last one. So you want to make changes to your application, or you may have funds that are no longer being used for this specific cycle. And so how do you handle the questions and the establishing of those funds and removal of those funds from cycle to cycle? So who's going to benefit from today's webinar? So any of you administrators that are responsible for creating that new application from year to year, cycle to cycle, when you're creating a new application process, if you're the ones that are responsible for building that application out, then of course you're going to be benefiting from today's session. So some of the key topics we're going to talk about is managing the application fund, and then what that includes, how to build that posting fund, because this is a one-to-many application process. So with a one-to-many application process, you always have that posting fund. And then if you have any new funds, how do you create those funds, and then how you attach those funds to that new application form. And then after we talk about the fund setup, we'll go ahead and talk about cloning your application, and then what rolls over when you clone an application. And then also, of course, how to get those funds that we built in the first section, then how do you attach those to the application form? When does that all get linked together? And then the application contact, some of you that have been with us for years, we have made this adjustment a couple of releases ago, but just in case you're not aware of how to find that, we do want to kind of touch on that a little bit, the application contact, where you add that in this rollover process. And then again, assigning the funding and then text tabs. And then after we talk about that, we're going to take a quick break for about 5 to 10 minutes. And that's when Maureen will address any of the questions that you've asked during the session. So again, that question box, very important. While we're going through this, if you have a quick question, type it in the question box. Maureen will answer those when we get to that Q&A break. And then after the break, we'll continue. We'll talk about sections, some of the key things you need to look for in updating your sections. And then how to add questions, how to remove questions. If you have a new fund, how do you set up the questions for that? How do you build the criteria for that new fund based on those new questions? And then the opposite, if you need to remove a fund, what's the best practice for removing a fund, especially if later on you're going to be bringing that back in. You don't want to lose that fund criteria that's been built. So what's a nice little helpful best practice, helpful hint that will help you keep all that information intact? And then we'll talk about other items that clone over, like your notification email templates, your evaluation setup, what rolls over with that, the committees, your automated scoring, and then a key setup with the ad hoc reports. So anytime you create a new application form, you make changes in that application form, a functionality that's a very important step in regards to the ad hoc reports. And then we'll cover about how to test your application. You may have live applications. You don't want to make this application public. So what's the best practice for testing? And then after that, we'll take a quick break. And then Maureen will answer any of the final questions that came in during the second session. And then we'll go ahead and close the session for the day. So let's go ahead and get started, because like we said, it could be almost an hour, hour and a half. We do have a lot to cover. Since this is a one-to-one application process where you have that one application tied to multiple funding sources, there are a couple of extra steps that you need to do in regards to your rollover that you wouldn't have in a one-to-one application process. But since you have those additional funds, we want to make sure and cover all that today. And so application rollover, what do we mean by application rollover? Well, that's when you take a previous year or previous cycle's application and you clone it to make a new application. You're not creating a whole brand new application. You're just taking that old one, cloning it, bringing over the data, not the applicants, but bringing over the data so that you have an exact replica, a clean slate to start your new cycle for your new group of applicants. So the first step in the rollover process is to create your funding. And the reason you do this is because once the funding's created, then you can clone your application and it'll all be there ready for you to attach. And it'll be a simpler process than going back and forth and back and forth. So one of the most important things to make note of is the academic fiscal year that you're going to be doing your awarding in, because every date that the system picks up is based on that fiscal year academic year. When it's doing the rollover process, it's going to look at your start and end dates of your application form. We'll talk about that a little bit more detail when we get to that. It'll pick a date, but the academic fiscal year is the period that you're going to be awarding your applicants. So let's say this is 2025, but your actual awarding, maybe this is a whole year you give your applicants to apply. So you're not going to be awarding until maybe 25, 26. So when we're creating the funds, it's very important to think about that, because the application, when you build the application, in the application build, you'll see today when we clone it, it determines what that period is. And so when you're creating your funds first, you want to make sure that you pick up that period, especially if you're adding a new fund, not the posting fund, but a whole new fund, because that new fund won't show up on the assigned fund screen if it doesn't have the same academic year as the application. So that's what you want to think of. And then when you build your fund, make sure you get that correct academic year. I'll show you that here in a minute. And then when you go to the application form, make sure you're picking that same academic year, the system's picking up, or you're overwriting it so that it matches the funds and they show up when you get to your assigning of the new funds. So to create a new fund, let's start with that. I'm going to go to the site. I am using a scholarship site. However, this is the exact same process, same screens, maybe just a little bit of wording change from scholarship to grant, but it's all the same process and the same functionality and the same steps for the one-to-many process. So of course, the manage application funds is where we start. I'm logged in as an admin. Manage applications is where all of your funds that you're building are. So of course, with a one-to-many process, we have that posting fund. That's not the fund you're awarding, but that's the fund that posts the application out to the site. So in a one-to-many process, you have that posting fund. And then you have individual awarding funds that are linked to that application, and those are the funds that you are going to award in the one-to-many process. So you have one posting fund, and then you're going to assign multiple, more than one, awarding fund. So let's talk about first about the posting fund. This is your first step. You need to build that posting fund. So of course, since we're cloning from year to year, you probably have a posting fund from a prior cycle. You can see here I have a bunch of posting funds. And so I want to clone my 2024 one-to-many posting fund. I want the exact same data. It's going to be the same data. I might have to make some verbiage changes in some of my editing, but I do want to just go ahead and clone this one. It makes it easier for me than starting all over. If I wanted to create a whole fresh one, I could go up here and hit set funding opportunities and then fill in all the blanks. However, since it's the same data and maybe just a couple changes in the verbiage, then I can just go ahead and change and clone this one and then make the appropriate adjustments. So I'm going to come over here, hit the clone. I'm going to, first screen is what do I want to name it? Well, right now it's just giving me a copy of the one I'm already cloning. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove this, and then I'm going to change this to 25. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit clone and edit, because I do want to make my edits at this time. If I just hit clone, it would just clone it, and then I would have to go back in and then make the edits. So this clone and edit just takes me to the next screen. And so here I have my new funding source. I don't have an associated application, and I can't add an associated application at this moment, and I don't want to because I don't have that application built. And I don't want to because I want to make sure that when I attach the posting fund, it picks up the correct academic year. I don't have to think in the posting fund process as much. And then here, just look at some of the things that may have changed. If I have more sponsoring orgs or it's changed, I want to make an adjustment. The annual budget academic year is always 0 on a posting fund. So of course it's going to be 0. Right now it only has 24-25, but as soon as I associate the application on the posting fund, this is the posting fund. Don't confuse this with the actual awarding fund. I don't need to worry about this academic year, because as soon as I associate the application, it's going to pick up the application's academic year. So I can leave that blank. I can just let it default. And then down here, if I need to make some adjustments, if it's published, I might want to go ahead and put this as no for now, because especially if I have live applications out on the site, I'm building this out right now. I don't want any applicants coming in and seeing this application and trying to apply to it. One, I don't have an application, but once I'm in the building process, I don't want anybody having access to that application until it's finalized. So I'm going to go ahead and put this published no. And then if you have integration, then you'll probably be using these. So just confirm that all of that is set up correctly. The show fund on fund details, you do want to go ahead and keep that yes, so that you can see all the fund details when the applicants are viewing this fund in the fund details screen that they can access. So you want to make sure you can see that. And then just go through and look at your editor boxes. Does anything need to be updated? Do you have any dates in any of these descriptions? Look at your descriptions. Maybe the awards amount that you're going to be awarding for this cycle, maybe that's different. Those are the key things you're going to want to be looking at, is all these editor boxes and what are the key items that you need to update in these editor boxes. Now you're going to see I have several more fields that you may be seeing because I have a test site. And of course, with the test site, I have all of those award fields activated that are in site settings. Those are additional fields that you can activate on your awards, your funding screen, so that you can collect additional data on that. So of course, once I'm here, if
Mm,
I have search filters, I can adjust.
Christine,
Yes, ma'am.
hi Christine.
Hi.
Christine, sorry for disturbing, but I cannot see the presentation. I do not know if others can, uh, for some reason.
Oh,
Yep. Can you please check the setting? I haven't received
Okay, can you see it
any
okay?
concerns from the attendees. Yeah, the attendees haven't mentioned any. Now I can see the presentation.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay,
Okay, so we're
start
here
on with
in
the
Manage
session.
Application
Okay,
Fund, and then I've cloned
great.
the
Thank you.
fund. You're welcome.
Hmm.
I've cloned the fund. And then once you clone the fund, we're here in the screen. And then you can go here, just scroll through, look for the items you need to update, and then go ahead and hit Save and Exit. And then this is where it'll tell you it's been updated. Click OK. And now we've built that 2025, that posting fund. We have that posting fund here ready to go. So now we've got the posting fund, so that's done. So if we didn't have to make any more adjustments, maybe all of our funds that we had last year are the same funds we're having this year. Maybe we need to remove some, but you don't need to worry about that here on this screen. But maybe you have some new funding, scholarships. Maybe you have some new scholarships that have come in, grants. Maybe you've decided to add another interest area to your funding. So you have different awards by interest area, scholarships. You have an additional scholarships. New donors come in, created a scholarship. You have enough funding to award that scholarship for this period. So how do you add those? So very simple. Again, we're just going to go back out to the Manage Application Funds. We created our posting fund, so we should have it here, our 2025 one-to-many posting fund. Now we want to build a whole new fund for this new funding that's going to be coming in to be attached. So we're going to go here to set up funding opportunities. I'm just going to do this real quick here. I'm going to give it a name. Whoops. I click in the field here. Click in the field. Let's just do this. Okay, I'm not going to associate an application because in a one-to-many, you do not associate the application in the fund setup. You always do that in the assigned. And then I'm going to look at any other things that I want to update to make sure that I have all that. Now here, with this individual award fund, this is the important step. You do need to put at least a 0 in the annual budget academic year, and you do need to create an academic year for the specific award. And that's going to be attached to the application, because if you don't do it here, when we get into the assigned funds, you're not going to see it, because it's going to have, the application's going to have a 25-26 fiscal period is what mine's going to have. And if I don't add a 25-26 to this, then it's not going to show in that assigned fund. So I want to make sure, okay, my application I know is going to be 25-26 award period. I'm going to select that, and I'm going to have a 0 amount here. And now I'm going to go through publishing. I can publish it if I like, or I might want to just leave it as no, but it'll, when it here, as long as I have the show fund on fund details, when the applicants are being matched to the awards, if I have this activated, they'll be able to see that data. Email signature, I won't need to do anything with that because I have a posting fund. And of course, any emails that go out, the application notification center, when I do the application, I go to that notification center. The email signature field in that application isn't going to look at the individual application. It's going to be looking at the posting fund. And if you remember on that posting fund, I did have the email information filled out. So this I can leave blank. If I want to put a description so that when they see the fund details, they can see the description, I can. You can just plug something in. I'm just going to put some quick stuff in here. I can leave these fields blank, and then I can hit save and next. And then if I have any any contact, so maybe I have multiple contacts within my organization and I want to add it to contact, I can do that here by clicking add contact. I'm going to hit next. If I want to add donor information, I can add the donor information at this time and click next. And if I'm using search filters, I can add those as well, so that when the applicants are searching for funding, they can find this. If I had it published, they would be able to find it in that search, and it would direct them to the correct application. So I can hit finish. I don't need to do search filters on this. Okay, so it's telling me it's been created. So now we have our one-to-many posting fund, and then we also have our new 2025 fund. So now we have our funds built. So what's next? So the next step, of course, is to clone the application and then the items that roll over with the cloned application. So what rolls over? Well, pretty much everything. It pretty much makes an exact copy of the application form that you have. So general information, sections and questions, pre-qualification, request instructions, submit messages, text tabs, all the assigned application funds that were assigned to the previous one, they're going to roll over with this one. Don't be alarmed and say, well, yeah, but I have some that I want to remove. That's fine. You can, once you roll it over, I'll show you how to remove those without losing the data, because you don't want to lose data. Because as soon as you delete a fund from your application form, it's going to delete all of the criteria that's built for that specific funding. So those are things that you need to think about. You don't want to delete it. I'm going to show you a helpful hint as to how to keep it intact but not have the applicants match to it and see it. The criteria, all that's going to roll over because of the assigned application funds being attached, so is the criteria. And then automated scoring, the tasks, the committees, the email templates, and your ad hoc reports. All of that is going to roll over with the rollover process. So let's talk about how to clone. And then as part of the cloning process, we'll talk about assigning the new application word amounts will be the next thing we talk about. So let's go clone an application. So now we're now on the site. I'm still on the Manage Funds application funds. So I need to go home. I'm back here on the home screen. So now I got to determine, okay, which application do I want to clone? I want to clone this 2024 one-to-many demo app. So I want to make sure it's here on my active screen. I'm in my active. If not, then I need to go to the archive and then clone it from the archive screen. So I want to make sure I'm in the active. I always like to make sure that it's in the active, just so I don't have to make sure that, the one that I just created, where did it put it? I want to make sure it is in the active screen. So I always want to make sure and put, if it's in archive, the one I want to clone, I put it to my active temporarily, clone it. You want to give it at least 24 hours from putting it to archive to active, of course, and then I can clone it, and then I can put it back to archive when I'm done. So I want to clone this one here, the one-to-many demo app. So I'm going to go up here to this clone existing application. And so what it's going to do is give me a drop down. And in that drop down, it's going to say, what application do you want to clone? Well, I want to clone that 2024 one-to-many demo app. So I'm going to select it. And again, it's going to give me, okay, what's the new name? So again, it's giving me a copy. So I want to remove that copy. And then I'm going to change this to 2025. And then that's what you're going to do for the rest of the application. Now you're going to look in your description. Do you have any dates that you want to change? Make those adjustments. So go through and look at all of your text fields. Do I need to make any adjustments? Here is that academic year. So right now it says auto. And what it's going to do is I'm going to give a begin date for my application. And then I'm also going to give a deadline date. And so since mine spans the whole year, my awarding, of course, doesn't happen until the 25 period. So what the system does is right now for the academic year, since it says automatic, it's looking at the begin date and the end date, going out to the site settings that manage academic fiscal year chart, and looking at these dates and determining what period it falls within. And so in that chart, it says this date and this date, between this date and this date is blank fiscal period. So it's going to look at that and automatically give it an academic year. And then any funds that are currently linked to this in the next step will have that same academic year put on it automatically. If they're already attached, it'll automatically put that academic year. The only one it will not be showing is that new fund that I just created, the brand new one. Remember, we had to go in when we built that fund and add an academic year. However, all the other award funds, you do not need to put that academic year. You don't need to go into the managed funds on each one of your individual ones and put that academic year. You don't need to do that. It's only on the new one that you built, because in the next step here, all of those funds you're going to see are still attached, and it's going to automatically pick up that date. And then anytime I change this application's academic year, it's going to automatically, any funds that have been assigned, it will automatically change that on those as well once they've been assigned. So I'm going to let this be auto. If I didn't want to and I knew it was the 25-26 period, I could go ahead and select this, but I'm going to go ahead and let it do an auto just to make sure that it's the 25-26 period. And then I'm just going to kind of go through and look at some of these other fields. If anything's changed that's not the same as the last one, I want to make sure and make those adjustments. And of course, there is information on what this screen is. This is the general information screen and what all these fields do. If you're unsure, you can always refer to the guides in regards to what each one does. So here we talked about the contact field. So how do I add that contact field? So this is the application contact. And before and in past, you used to have to create this and then go back into the general information and add it, but we do have the field right here. So don't miss this, because a lot of times you might have staff changes, or you might have somebody move from one position to another who's no longer the contact for all your applications that get those emails that come in on the application. So you want to go ahead and click the add and then make any adjustments as necessary. Or if it's the same, you can just leave it as is. And then here, look in your instructions. Did you have any date information you need to adjust? And make those adjustments also. And then look in your instructions and make sure this is where you would edit those if you wanted to make any changes to it. And of course, once you're done, the very next step, it's very important to go ahead and hit save and exit once you're done, but don't hit it too many times because you don't want to miss this next step. So I'm going to hit it one time. And then this next step is very important, because if you miss this step, you do have to manually add all the funds, assign them. This is automatically looking at the last application process. All of the funds that were attached to the last application process will show here with check boxes showing that they're going to roll over with this application. And so I only need to make a few little adjustments. The first adjustment I want to make is, what's the new posting fund? So up here it says select associated fund. It says if you wish to associate a fund to the newly cloned application, please click here and select the fund you wish to add to the new application. So in a one-to-many process, this is the posting fund. So right now I don't have anything here. So I'm going to hit the drop down and I'm going to look for that new posting fund that I just created. There it is. And so that's the posting fund that needs to go on the top line. So this top associated fund is always the posting fund. Now you're also going to notice when I cloned it, it brought over the posting fund from the application I cloned from. So of course I don't want that. So I'm going to unselect that. And at this stage, I'm going to give you a warning. Say I have a fund, it's the AJG Fellowship. I know I'm not going to have funding this year for the AJG Fellowship, so I don't want this attached, but do not remove it at this stage. And the reason I say that is because if I was to unselect this and hit save, any criteria I had built for this fund is now gone. It's going to delete it from this application form. A lot of you have criteria that's very extensive, and if you delete that fund, you've lost all that criteria. So let's say next year comes around, I now have funding for AJG. The donor came through, they gave us some more funding. We now have enough funding to award scholarships this year. So I want to bring it back. So if I had deleted this, then when I go to clone 2025, it's not going to have AJG in it anymore because I deleted it. So in those scenarios, if it's a fund that you may need in the future, do not remove it. I will show you in the criteria how to keep it from matching to your applicants. And then what you do from year to year. That way it keeps it all intact. It's hidden on each year. You can bring it. It's just you don't have it showing to your applicants and it's not matching to them, because we're going to show you a little best practice for that. So here is the list. Of course, you're seeing that one that I created, that new one, that 2025 one. It's not here yet. And so I'll show you in the next step here how to assign that. But that won't be here because it's not one that was on the original application I'm cloning. It wasn't on the cloned one, so it's not going to be on this one. So I will have to manually assign that single one. Now, of course, if you bypass this screen, then none of these funds will be attached and you will have to manually assign them and rebuild the criteria, because if you don't attach them, it's not going to bring that criteria over either. So you're going to have a mess on your hands if you do not leave this intact and leave these selected. So I'm going to keep them here. I'm going to go ahead and hit Save Fund Details. It says it's been associated and linked successfully. And now we're going to go into that application. So now here's the application. There's the posting fund tied to it. I'm going to click on the application because I still have one more step. I still have that new fund I built. I need to get that onto the application. So I'm going to go to Application Settings. And then Application Settings, I'm going to go to Assign Application Funds. And then once I get to Assign Application Funds, it's going to show all those funds attached down here, with the exception of that new one. Here's that new one, 2025 Scholarship Fund. It's sitting up here in the unassigned funds. All of these have a 25-26 academic period, which is what the application has, so it's going to pull them up here. Of course, you know I have pages and pages of funds, and they're not all here because they don't all have that academic year. So I'm going to hit this one. I'm going to select it by clicking it, and then I'm going to hit the directional arrow here to move it over, and then I'm going to hit Save. It's going to say, are you sure? And now if I look here, it's here in the listing. Now the next step before you go any further, I always recommend, because some of you have the process, it's a add-on to our system, that if it has a zero amount, it will not show to your applicants. So I always recommend to come in here, if you're unsure, to just go ahead and make sure and put a monetary amount on all of the funds that are going to be awarded using this funding period. Anything that's zero, if you have that special add-on, if it's zero, it will not show to the applicants as being a matched fund. It will not show to them. However, you can see in the background any applicants, but maybe it's, and that's nice, because if you have funds from year to year that you're not going to be funding, you just leave it zero and it's going to go ahead and not match it to the applicant. I do like that functionality with that special add-on. So if you're interested in that, reach out via a support ticket and see if it's something that would be of benefit to you and the effects that it has on the system. Okay, so how do I get the award amount? So what's nice about this is, remember when I built the fund, it had the academic year and I left it at zero. If I would have put a monetary amount in there, it would have showed on the screen for the 25-26 academic year. But I'm going to go ahead and update those figures. So I want to do them all at once. So this is a nice screen that does them all at once. I don't have to go into each individual fund in the managed fund and add those figures. I can just do it all right here on the screen. And so to do that, you hit this little button, Update Amount Allocated. It pulls up the screen. You do have to select all the funds that you want to include. So again, I don't want that 24. No, that is one I want in there. Here, so you would just come in, put in the amount, and then once you put in the amount, and with that new functionality also, once it reaches that figure, it will no longer match applicants to that amount. Once you're awarding, when you're awarding applicants, and it reaches that figure, it will stop matching that fund to the applicants once you've exhausted the funds in that account. So it's also beneficial, that feature, if you're having an active application, you're taking applicants and you're awarding them as they're applying, you're not waiting till the whole cycle's over. That kind of helps you keep track of what's been awarded, what's still remaining, is it still going to match these funds to the applicants, and so forth. So once you've corrected all those, you do have to make sure that the funds you're updating are selected. I am going to not have my AJG fellowship this year, so I'm going to go ahead and change that to 0. And then once I'm done with all this update here, I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And now I have it updated. Now, one thing that's also important, if you have a 2-cycle, you have a 25, you have a fiscal period, and in that fiscal period, you do 2 award cycles. This is for the entire period. So let's say cycle 1, they get awarded 25-26, and I'm only going to do 50,000 in awards. Or this one maybe only 500 in awards. So don't get confused. This is the entire period. So if this was only 500 for this application, that's fine. I do want to make sure though that this is 1,000 for the second cycle, so that it calculates 1,000 and not the 500. It always, this is the entire fiscal period, not just the application itself, the award for this application. It's all the amount that's going to be awarded from this fund for the entire fiscal year. And then once I'm done, I've updated those funds, I've added my new fund, we're ready to move forward. So one other thing before we take a break here is, in application settings, something that you want to make sure of when you clone is making sure that you have the text tabs updated. So the text tabs, anytime you clone an application form, the text tabs do clone. However, if I click on one here, you'll see it does not publish those text tabs. So one, you do want to go in all your text tabs and look at the text that's in there and update those dates to current dates so that it's not old data. If you don't want to use the text tab, that's fine. But if it's one that you are still wanting to use, you want that to be on the applicant's dashboard, that little button that says important dates and deadlines, and you want them to have that. Anytime you clone, the one thing it does not do is it does not publish it yet. It has to be published in order for that to show to the applicant on their dashboard, because it's assuming I'm going to clone these for you, but you may not want to use them, so I'm not going to publish them. I need you to go in manually and make the adjustments. One, it's going to force you to look at the text and update the dates, and then always remember to publish those so that they show to your applicants. If you do not publish them, they will not be present on their dashboard. And then once you hit publish, make your changes, be sure to hit save. Okay, so I'm going to break here and let Maureen address any questions that may have come. It's all yours, Maureen.
Thank you, Christine. Okay, we do have a few questions. Number one is, what is the purpose of a text tab? Why do we need text tabs? It's very simple. You can add as much information as you wish on the manage application funds within the fund itself. Okay, but then there are those additional information, additional pieces of information, like Christine is showing here, important dates and deadlines. Maybe there is a little bit more on your funding process, eligibility, etc. You want the applicants to come in and have a look at this information, for example, the dates and deadlines, right? Maybe there's a link that you'd like to add in here. So all of that can be done as a part of additional information provided to the applicants. That will help them in completing the application process, okay? Throughout the application process, for example. So that's the purpose of the text tabs. Another question is, I wish to clone the application from an archived application from last year. Can I go ahead and clone it? Absolutely, you can clone the application within the archived list of applications. However, if you clone an application from the archived applications itself, it will end up in the archive list itself. Okay, so you have to move it to the active list, which will take approximately 24 hours for you to do that. So there are two ways of doing it. Clone the application within the archive list, it stays in the archives, and then move it to the archives or active list, or move the archived application into the active list, use that and clone the new application that will obviously stay in the active applications list. Okay, remember there's a 24-hour window for active applications to move into the archives and archives into the active list. If you still need any more help, please feel free to reach out to us, via Zendesk tickets. There is another question. Does the add edit mean there is criteria added to the sections? No. Christine, can you go back to the sections and questions, please? So I'm sure you're referring to the home, sections, this specific screen there. Okay, the add edit here. There's two add edits here. Number one is for the conditional logic, right? The skip logic based on a prior information that you're requesting from a client, from an applicant in another section. If it is green, as Christine is showing here, this section that is green, that add edit, means there's active conditional logic.
Yes, and we'll
Meaning
get
this
into that.
section,
I'm just going to stop you right there,
yes,
Maureen, just to save
yes, yes,
save us
yeah,
on
yeah,
time.
yeah,
We're going to be
yeah,
covering that when we get to that. I'll be covering it.
absolutely,
Yeah, we're
yes,
not to
yes.
that part yet. So
We're not going in there, right? So we'll cover that in the next portion, similar to another question that is related to fund criteria, etc. So we'll be getting into that as well, and a few more questions that have come up. But so far, I think, Christine, I'll wait for the next portion of the session to cover
excellent.
these questions. Thank you,
Excellent.
everyone.
Very good. Yeah, yeah. I just didn't want to. I know we're tight on time, so I was like, we're going to be
Oh,
covering that in
yes,
about 2 seconds
yes.
here.
Thank you. Awesome.
Okay,
Thank you,
excellent.
Christine.
Excellent job, Marina. I appreciate that so much. Thank you. Okay, so let's move forward now and talk about, we've assigned the funds, and if you notice when I assigned the funds, I still did not remove that AJG. I just took the zero amount out, but I left it assigned, because if I would have removed it in the assigned funds section, it's going to do the same thing as if I didn't select that blue box when we built the application. It's going to totally delete everything, and I do not want to delete it. I need to keep it attached. Don't ever, if you need to bring it back, do not remove it, because you're going to lose all of that criteria, and that's going to be sad. You'll cry, because you're going to have to redo it the next year. You're going to bring it back and you're like, what was that criteria? You're going to have to look back 3 applications to when it was there, find it, maybe do a screenshot so that you know what it was, and then go and rebuild it back in your application. So I want to try to show you how to keep from having to do that today. Okay, so adding questions and sections. So when you have a new application, of course, there may be sections and questions you need to add, especially if you're adding a new fund. There may be specific questions you need to build that pertain to that criteria that isn't a question that you're asking right now. So you need to add that to your application form. Or maybe there's a section. Maybe once they've been matched to a specific application, especially that new one, you have a request section that they need to complete because of that new funding source that was built. Maybe that you need a specific request from a specific individual, and so you need a specific request form for that individual, so you need to build that section out. So that is something you need to look, some of the things you need to think about moving forward. So one of the first things is when you build your application, go to your application settings. And of course, the first screen is sections and questions. And just kind of look at your sections. And one thing you want to confirm is the deadline date, first of all. So of course, your application form, all of the application sections, probably maybe your request sections, maybe not. Some have request sections that have different deadlines. Look at the deadline date, because when it clones, you're going to notice it's giving the exact same deadline for all of the sections from the date that I put when I cloned it over, that end date, because it doesn't know. It doesn't know what these other section dates are. It's just going to automatically default to the date of the deadline date of the application. So of course, I have my acceptance sections, I have my post acceptance. None of those have the same deadline date. So those are things that you do want to make sure and go in to the edit over here where it says edit. I need to go in and on the edit, select it, select the edit, and then go down here and make sure and make the adjustment to my deadline date. So this comes after the application process, so they're not even going to be doing this probably until March. And so I want to make sure I get those deadlines appropriate. Now that doesn't affect your academic year. This is just on this specific section. And then of course the statuses, make sure you have the statuses selected correctly. Look in your instructions, make sure you have the instructions selected. And if this is for a fund, make sure that everything's set up appropriately for this specific section. So that's what you're going to want to look at. If you need to add a section, of course, make sure that you build it, and then it's going to be here ready. So what Maureen was talking about is these conditions. Anytime you are removing sections or adding sections, one thing you do want to get familiar with is all these conditions here. Anything that's in green that says add edit. So you're going to want to look at all those green ones. Click on that add edit, and then this is the condition. So if I was to, here it says fund eligibility contains DHG scholarship. So let's say the DHG scholarship I don't want to bring back. If I was to remove the DHG scholarship from my process where it wasn't matching them, guess what's going to happen? Then certain things would maybe start hiding and showing. So that's what you want to make sure of. What's the criteria? What is it asking? If I remove something, is it going to start showing the section? If I don't remove it, is it going to start showing the section? What's the build of that criteria? With sections, more than likely, if you remove something, because it's saying if it's there, then to show it. But if it's the opposite, if it's saying it's not there, then show it. Then that's what you want to make sure. What's the question that it's pointing to? And is it okay if I was to do something with this? What's going to happen with that condition? Okay, so that's what you want to get used to. The same with questions. When you're looking at questions, like in personal information, look for the ones in green. If they are any in green, let's see, essays. So here they're in green. So look at the criteria. What's it saying? It's looking at the eligible funds. If it doesn't say this scholarship, then don't show it. So just getting familiar with that criteria and what's going to happen if I was to remove the question. If I remove that fund eligibility question, what's going to start happening? That sort of thing. Think about it. Okay. So that's what those questions are. That's the green edit. Anytime, like I said, you're removing something, then you want to make sure that it's not affecting criteria someplace else. So if you're familiar with your criteria questions, you know what questions they're looking at, the question that it's dependent on, and you're wanting to do something with that dependent question, then you need to ask yourself, what's the recourse? If I remove a question that has dependencies, what's going to happen to those dependencies? Are they going to start showing? They're not going to start showing. What's happening with that? Okay, so that's a caution to use there. To add questions, so I added a new fund. So how do I make sure that those questions are there? So I'm just gonna, what you do is you just know where those, get familiar, figure out, okay, where do I want to put the question? And then open up that section, and it's just a matter of adding a question and then add that question accordingly. So very simple, just add the question. Now, one thing I do want to tell you, if you have a master template, which you will have a master template if you're using global reports, you have to have a master template, as well as if you're a grant user and you're using the agency profile, you have a master template. So those two, in order to do global reports, any question you have built in your application has to be in the master template. So anytime you add new questions and you're using a master template and you want to be able to do global reports looks at the master template and reports on questions in the master template. So if the question isn't in the master template, it's not going to allow you to do a report across all the applications that contain that field. So it's always best to build new questions in your master template, which is here in the master template. And then when you build them in the master template under application settings, when you build them there, once they're built, you can then push those questions down to the application. Now, I'm not going to get into how to do a master template. We do have training on that, and we do have a link attached to our guide today. But I just want you to know, if you're adding new questions and you need to be able to do reports, or you want to be able to do reports in the future, that question has to be in the master template. So anytime you're removing questions or adding questions, do it in the application, but do not remove questions from your master template, because if you do, you won't be able to have any future history of the reports. And if you add questions, always do it in the master template. So never remove a question, because the master template is exactly what it is. It's a master template. It's a history of every question you've built on your site if you've built it in the master template. If it's not built in the master template, then you don't have the means to push up to the master template. You can only push down. And then that's where you would need to reach out to us to get that question pushed up to the master template. So it's always better to add a master template, push them down to your application, and then once you push them in the application, they're there ready to go. So now let's talk about my application that I just built, that new fund. Let's talk about the new fund first. And I've added the fund in the assigned funds, and I have the application. I know the questions, and I know that the questions are already there, but I have that special automated feature where it automatically builds the criteria based on adding the fund to the specific question. Then it'll put that question in the criteria, and then all I need to do is add the values when I get to building my criteria. So that's what I need to do at this step. So I added my new fund. In order to be matched to that fund, so once they're matched, it's going to show up here in fund eligibility, the fund that they've been matched to. I have this matching fund. And so I'm going to go to my questions that I've built. And I know that the criteria is for a Latin female. So I'm going to go to personal information, because I know that's where those questions are housed, and click on it. I'm going to go find those questions. Even though they're already existing, I do need to add my new fund to that to be able to build the criteria for it. So I'm going to look for my two questions. I have my gender, wherever that is here. I have my gender question. So I'm going to click on that. And with that special automated fund criteria build, it gives me this field where I can say this question is used in fund criteria, yes. And then here, criteria fund, what are the funds that are using this question as criteria? So these are all the funds that have a criteria of gender in them. And so I have that new fund that I just added, so I want to make sure and select it here and click OK. And then once I do that, this says yes, I've selected the fund. I can hit save and exit, and that criteria is built. Now, also something else you want to look at since I'm in this section is look at your questions and make sure you don't have any date information in any of your questions. If you have it in the question, you can change it in the question label, but do not change it in the XML name, because again, if you change the XML, let's say I had a 2024 something, and then in my XML, I need to leave that intact because the applicant won't be able to import from application to application. And of course, if it's something from the master template and I change it here, it won't allow me to do any reporting on it either across multiple applications. So you can change the label if you have a date. This is the blue part, but do not change the XML name. Okay, so now back to my question. I have my gender. I've updated that. And I also have the ethnicity of Latin. So I need to go in here and click on that question and then do the same. It says use and fund criteria, yes. And then I need to just go here, find that question that fund, and make sure and click OK, and then hit save and exit. Okay, so now you do that with all the new funds, or maybe a fund had additional criteria. And maybe you have an existing fund and the donor added some criteria, then you need to go in based on that criteria. First, ask yourself, is the question there? If it's not there, where do you want to put the question and build the question? And as you're building a question, like if I was building a new question here by clicking the add question, as I'm building the question, make sure to select this. And then once you select yes, the field will show up criteria fund. Don't get that mixed up with the show for fund. That's for the review process. This is for the matching of funds. And so this has to say yes, and then this field will pop up, and then you can select it and then hit save on that new question. And then of course, if you have criteria that was added and the question was there, you just do the same thing as I did, find the question, click on it, make sure that that specific fund's been attached to that question. So then once that fund has been attached, all those you do that to all the questions for the criteria. Now that new question, that new fund, I'm ready to build the criteria for it. So I can go to manage funds criteria now. And then I can find my new fund, which is right here. And I can hit set criteria. And since I've added those two fields in the question itself, all I need to do now is just finish the build of the values. So it's added the questions automatically, and now I just need to add the specific values. So I'm going to come here, my gender, I want gender to equal female, and my ethnic group contains Hispanic or Latin. But then I notice when I look at this list, oh, I have two. So I need to pick up two. So then I'm going to build two here. So I'm going to say it has to be this, and they have to be of Latin origin. So that's Hispanic or Latino, or, and then again, I can just hit this duplicate here. I want to delete this one because I don't want that one. If I hit duplicate, it'll pick up an exact duplicate, and then I can just go ahead here and then put Mexican American 1 and 2 or 2, and then we're done, and then we can hit save and exit. And now I have that criteria for that. Now if I had criteria, maybe I had a fund where they added criteria and I had to go to those questions, always make sure that fund that you had additional questions that you needed to add to the criteria, that you come up here, hit the view eligibility criteria, and you've built the criteria, and now you just need to add the values. You don't forget to add the values once you've added the question. That's very important. So that's how you add questions. So now let's talk about the opposite. Let's talk about removing questions. So before I talk about the criteria and removing funds, maybe I have questions that last year we asked, but we don't need them anymore. They're not pertaining to a fund or anything. It was just maybe a superfluous question. We realized, why are we asking that? It's not pertaining to anything. Very simple, same with sections. So maybe there's a, go into the question here. So maybe in personal information, maybe I'm asking for a home phone, and I realize, you know what, nobody has a home phone anymore. Let's just remove that completely. It's not tied to any criteria. The best way is you can delete it. Once you delete a question, it's gone for good. You can never bring it back. So if you're unsure about a question, whether you want to bring it back or not, it's better to exclude a question. Excluding allows you to have a question out there. If that question is excluded and it has conditions, which is going to have meaning here in a minute, when you exclude a question, it won't lose the conditions. If you delete a question, it will delete the conditions on that question. So here, maybe home phone, or cell phone, or work phone. If I delete home phone, then it's gone forever, or I can just select it here. I can look over here and see if it's excluded or included. If it's already excluded and I do this, it's going to include it. So it always does the opposite of what it says here. If it says yes and I select something, it's going to do the opposite. So if there was a yes in this excluded column and I selected it and hit the more options, exclude, include, it's going to do the opposite. It's going to include it. So in this case, I'm looking at home phone. I don't see the yes for include, exclude. So I know when I come up here and hit more options, exclude, include, it's going to exclude that question and it will not be part of the application form. And then when I scroll down after I've done that, you'll see here it now has a yes, and so that will not be part of the application form. However, the question's still there, So next year when I clone this, I can maybe go here and bring it back in. Maybe we realize, you know what, there are some that don't even have cell phones, believe it or not. So what do? I can come here and then I can bring it back in and get a home phone. So that's how you exclude, include. So same with sections. Maybe there's a section I don't want to have anymore. So let's talk a little bit about my scenario. Say I have this section, DHG scholarship form. So this here, so here I see it's got a green. So first thing I'm gonna do before I deactivate this section is I'm gonna look at the conditions, and it's saying fund eligibility. It's looking at the eligible funds question. The eligible funds question is built in this fund eligibility section. That's the question that once the applicant has done the application, they go into this fund eligibility section and say, show me my matched funds. And so the system's going out, it's going out and looking at that criteria that you built and saying, does this applicant match to this fund? And then the system's going to say, yeah, they do match to this fund. So let's show that they've matched to it, and that'll be in their list of fund eligibility. So this is saying that if an applicant has been matched to the DHG endowed scholarship, show this section. So maybe I don't want this section anymore. So I can go ahead, I want to keep this, but I don't want to lose my criteria because maybe next year I want to bring this back. So just ignore it. So now you know what the criteria is, so I can exit. And I know that if this fund eligibility question contains this, then it's going to show this section. So one thing I might want to do is maybe I don't need this form. I'm just going to come over here and unselect it. And any section that you unselect will no longer be part of that application form. However, when I unselect it, it's going to keep the condition intact so that I can bring it back later and it'll still have that condition on it. If I was to delete this section completely, I would lose this criteria as well. So here I can just unselect, and then anytime you unselect, you do want to go ahead and hit save. If you forget to hit save, it will no longer be unselected. It'll keep it selected. So one thing you would do is just unselect it and hit save. I don't want to do that because I want to keep that in mind. But that's how you would handle those scenarios. And then one thing I like to do too is if I'm removing something, especially if it's for fund eligibility and I want to just get it out of my way, it's not going to be part of this application, I'll unselect it and then I'll come here to the display order and move it down to the bottom of the page, or I'll go into the section edit and then change the display order to like the last number so that it goes to the bottom of the page. But it's there, it's just not in my it's not here, and I'm like, what's this? This doesn't make sense. It's going to be down here. You can see I've kind of done that with some of these already. Okay, so that's how you do that. That's how you remove a section or deactivate a section instead of deleting it with the section level. So now we've talked about how to build my new fund. So now let's talk about a couple of different scenarios. So we have two different scenarios, two different ways things are built. I'm going to do the easy one first and how to remove the sections and questions for that fund, and then how to add go to the criteria, what can I do? And then I'll talk about the other way first. So the first one is the most recommended process that we have. And that is where you have your application, you have all these questions. Based on the questions they answer, the system is matching them based on extensive criteria or sometimes simple criteria that you've built in the managed funds criteria, like the one I just built for the scholarship fund that I did. So those are all built here. I have my fund eligibility question, and then based on the eligibility, I have questions appearing. So once they've been matched, so for instance, this DHG scholarship, any applicant matched to the DHG scholarship, once they get matched to it, this section's going to appear. So essays, if I go to my essay questions, I have this essay. Only if they're matched via fund eligibility will they get this question. So questions that I have where it's all it is if this fund eligibility question, if they meet this eligibility, they're going to see the fund. So all I have to do on those scenarios is I don't want them to get this section, maybe the MFC scholarship is no longer being offered. So all I have to do, I can leave all of this intact. I don't need to do anything here. If I wanted to, I could, just to be on this, from my comfort zone, I could come here and hit exclude and exclude that question, select it and hit exclude if I wanted to. And then they wouldn't get it. They wouldn't get that question because here it's been excluded, so they're not going to see that question. But another thing I can do is instead of and then when the MFC came back the next year, I would have to make sure and go in and reselect it and re-include it. I would need to remember to do that. So that's one thing you could do. You can do that. That's fine. However, another way, since the is going to the managed funds criteria, and say I don't have my MFC scholarship, I don't want any applicants to get matched to it. And once they're matched, I definitely don't want those questions appearing based on if they've been matched. So how do I keep them? A quick, easy way where I don't have to jump through several hoops to keep it from matching to the applicants is just go find that this specific funding. There's the MFC scholarship. Go to the view eligibility criteria. Whoops, that's not a very good example of one. Let's find one that has a lot of criteria here. Let's try this AHL. Okay, so say I didn't want this fund. The AHL fund was no longer there. What's the easiest, quickest way to keep it from matching to the applicants in that fund eligibility? Just come right here, add a new condition. It's going to put it to the end of the line. Make sure it says this and then are you a first generation contains yes. That should be 10. And then make sure it has an and in the prior one. And then just come right here. Application data, go by status, contains, we'll put equals. So it's saying if their status, so remember status is pending submission, submitted, withdrawn. They're not matched to this funding. So none of your applicants, unless they withdraw their application, is going to be matched to this fund. And if they're withdrawn, they're not part of the application process anyway. So this is all of your applicants, anybody that has applied, that has a pending submission forward, is not going to be matched to this fund. And then I can just hit save and exit. And then say next year, they come back, this AHL scholarship has funding. I've cloned my application for next year. It's still sitting out there. I can just quickly go into the view eligibility criteria. I know that, and make sure I withdraw this one by just hitting delete and hitting save and exit. And now it's ready for the next year. That's a nice simple way of doing that. So that's the first scenario, what a lot of our clients have. All of the applications have questions that are appearing based on the scholarship. The scholarship has, that specific scholarship has specific questions tied to it. So they build the criteria. If they meet that criteria, then that fund eligibility question matches them. Once they've been matched to it, the other sections appear, like the DSG scholarship. Same with the DSG. If I would have just put that on the DSG, they would no longer be seeing this because they're not matching as being eligible. So that's the simple way. Now, another way that some of our clients have is a little bit more complex when you're removing a fund. And that specific scenario would be, instead of having, you have the fund eligibility, but you've built in the scholarships available, maybe you want them to have a whole section where all the details of the scholarships there, they can determine if they want to apply. So in this scenario, this is before the fund eligibility happens. This is they're applying, they get to this question. This question here shows, so here's on these conditions, this is a question. these conditions on this question, this isn't criteria, this is this question has very complex criteria built on it. And I don't want to lose this criteria. So, but we're not funding this year and there's nothing matching them. So what's going to happen is when they get to this section, they're going to see this because of this criteria. Now this criteria, I don't want to put that status on here because it's just a little confusing. So I can just here, we want to keep this intact. And then this one here has the same thing. It's going to, when they get to this section, it shows this and it shows this and it says, do you want to apply? And so here again, exact same criteria. I don't want to lose any of that. So what can it's going to be a little bit more complex because this here is the question that what happens is you have this question here that they answer all the questions and then they see all those little sections. And then this question is the one that's the criteria question. So, and then when you build your criteria, what you have, I just drew a blank on what that question was pointing to. It is scholarships available, AJG. Okay, so if I go back here, so to manage funds criteria on the AJG, and I look at the criteria on the AJG, all it has is these two questions. So it's saying if they said yes to that question that I was just showing you, and it threw in one, are you a first generation college student? So I don't want them when they get to this section here, this is before the criteria, because remember, this is the question. They see this paragraph, they see this question. This is the question that when they answer yes, then it shows up in the fund eligibility and it matches them to it because they're selecting that they want to apply. You're giving them a list of all their scholarships and letting them choose what they want to apply to instead of having the system do it. Then when they choose, that's when the system locks it in as this is your eligible fund, you've applied to it. So when you have that scenario, it gets a little complex when you want to remove the fund because you don't want to lose these conditions. You don't want to add that status to these conditions. And if I come over here and try to exclude this one, it's going to be fine because this is just a paragraph. This is just a message text. You can see the type, it says message. It lets me exclude it. However, when I try to exclude this one, it's going to give me a message because right now that's being used, that specific question is being used to build the fund criteria. Now, some of you have 10 of these on a page. If I can exclude this one, but this one's still going to show, and people are going to say, do you meet the eligibility? They're going to say, well, what question is this to? I don't understand. You need to exclude this. How do you get it out of there? Well, what you're going to have to do in these scenarios is on this, if this AJG was no longer being presented for this year, and I know I might need to bring it back next year, I first have to go into this question. I need to get the criteria out of there. I can't go to the managed funds criteria and remove it because right now I have this automated setup. I need to put this here. I don't want to put it, it's got two different ones here. I want to come here and I want to make sure and unselect the fund. And then using fund criteria, I want to, since this is the only fund, the only one in there, so you don't, that's one thing you want to use caution is if this specific question is being used multiple times, which in this case it's not because this question is just for that specific funds paragraph. There's reading the paragraph and then determining yes. So I want to make sure and put this to no and hit save and exit. And then once I do that, it's going to automatically remove it from the fund criteria. So I'm going to go back to the fund criteria. I'm going to look at view eligibility criteria. And right here, I'm getting a message. See how it's in red? I need to delete that. And now it's saying, are you a first generation college student? This is being used for other things. I don't want to lose this criteria. So I do need to, that now I can come here and add a condition of that status of withdrawn, and then hit save and exit, because what's happening, I don't want to lose this criteria. And I want to keep it from matching them in the fund eligibility, because we no longer have, do you want to apply, yes or no? That question's gone right now. And hit save and exit. Oops, need to put and now it'll let me save and exit. Okay, so now it's there. Now they won't be matched to the AJG scholarship. But when I go into the application setup, the scholarship available, I have the conditions are still there. It's just the question here. I do need to come back here and make sure I exclude this so it doesn't show up. After I've removed it from the criteria, I can come back here and then exclude it. And then next year, when it needs to come back, I come into my new application. All I have to do is come here, go to more options, exclude, include, click yes. It's going to show this when they get to this section now because it's back. However, it's still not going to match them to the scholarship yet, because I have this question here, which is that eligibility. That's no longer in it. I know that. I need to come here. And that's why we say we don't recommend this. We recommend the first way I showed you. But a lot of you have this process, so this is how you would do this. You now need to come here, move this back to yes, because it's active, and then make sure and select the fellowship, click OK, hit save and exit. And then once you do that, you got to go back to the criteria. This is the next year, of course. Open up that view eligibility criteria. And then here you got the first generation, you got the status, and you got the scholarship available. So it's no longer the status, so you want to make sure and delete that. And then this one here, it's already built for you. Scholarships available. That's the question. If it contains yes, then show that question. And then hit save and exit, and you're ready to go. But you want to make sure you get, if you're removing it, you remove it, you exclude the question, remove it from the criteria, go to the criteria, remove it from the criteria, and add the withdrawn question if there's other questions. If that was the only one and you removed it, then you do need to, it's going to start matching everything if you don't have anything in there. So you always want to put that withdrawn status in there. Only match it if they're withdrawn. Because if you don't have any status or you don't have any criteria at all, then it's going to match everybody to that specific scholarship. So you always have to have at least that withdrawn in there for it to not match them. And then the next year, remove the withdrawn, include the questions, add the fund criteria question to the fund criteria, and then go into the fund criteria and make sure you remove that withdrawn, and then the criteria says the appropriate value. And that's it. So that's adding and removing questions based on adding your funds. Now, a couple of other things. So we've got removing questions and sections, and that you need to be aware of that does clone over is some other items that you want to look at. And so first of all, the evaluation setup. So in the cloning process, the evaluation process is going to clone over. And that's your scorecards, your task cards. So of course, the AJG scholarship, anything, you can keep those intact because those are just the task names. You can carry them from year to year. They're going to have them, but maybe you want to change them, change some questions, then you can go and click on it. Maybe you had dates, update your dates. Maybe you want to go in and edit the questions. You can edit some questions on those, maybe for the review process. Maybe you had dates, remove those dates, or you want to add some questions to that review process to help give you some more details on that applicant. So those are things you need to make sure of updating before you turn it over to your reviewers. Those are the evaluation setup. Of course, also if you have a new fund and you have review processes based on funds, make sure you get a task card created for that new fund so that you have it. You don't need to remove anything because they're only going to get it is if you have assigned them that task. So that you can leave all the tasks intact. If you're going to be using them maybe in the future, always leave them there. You can maybe turn off the show on reports so that you don't see anything on it, but you know it's going to be there. No one's going to see it because you're not assigning it, because you're not using it that year. Committees, all the committees that you had on your prior application, they're there. So before you started making assignments, make sure you've looked at that specific committee. Are the committee members different? Then if they are, then you do need to go in and edit that committee and change the reviewers out so that they're there so that you can make the appropriate assignments. Automated scoring. Any automated scoring, if it's changed, you want to make sure and go in on the specific funds and make the adjustments for that automated scoring so that they don't get scored based on those funding sources. So like the one thing, like with the AJG fellowship, it's going to give me automated scoring based on that. So I would have to remove this so that they wouldn't get that automated scoring for that specific funding source. Now, if this one score here was the exact same scoring for another fund, they all got the same scores, then I don't need to worry about putting it on here. But remember, once you remove something and it's the same from another one, you can always clone from one funding source to another. You can clone that automated scoring over if you accidentally delete something. So, but just know that if this fellowship had automated scoring that was totally different from the rest of them, you do want to make sure and remove those lines using the delete here, the lines that don't apply to that are just for the AJG fellowship. So let's say these two right here, it was a financial information, it was a financial based scholarship. And I don't, when I'm looking at the AJG and I'm looking at the scoring, I don't want that to show as their automated score. So I might want to go ahead and remove those. But of course, if I brought the AJG back, I need to make sure and add those back in. Now remember, the applicants don't see this. So if you want to leave it intact, you can. You just have to make a mental note when you're looking at your automated score, making sure you're picking it up by fund so that you're not getting the AJG score when you're looking at the DHG. Okay, so that's automated scoring. It clones over. The other thing that clones is notification templates. So what some things that you might forget with your email templates, maybe for instance, I have, look at your email templates. You have dates in those. Sometimes you put dates. Sometimes you physically typed. You didn't use a merge field. I have that here. I want to make sure and I adjust that to 2025. And then I can scroll down, hit update. And so do that with all of your email templates and make sure that those have the correct current information in them as well. Now, a very important step after you've made all of your changes to your application form, before you start testing, before you move forward with anything else after it's all built, you need to go to manage reports, because when you're testing for one, when you're testing, you want to make sure it's matching applicants to this appropriate funds. But anytime you make a new application and you start making changes to funds and you make your new application, before you start testing or go live, you do want to come here in the ad hoc reports, because of course questions that are removed, questions that are added, they're not going to be in your ad hoc reports. And this also affects the matching of fund eligibility. It always looks at this, and this specific feature here is what helps applicants get matched to any changes. So if you've made changes or you create a whole new fund, before you start testing and before you're ready to go live, always hit this button to update the data. Then once it's done running, it usually, you'll get an email and it'll tell you that it's completed, and then you're ready to start testing or you're ready to turn it over to your applicants. So usually what I like to do is I do this and then I start testing, because when you're testing, you want to test the eligibility, and then I start making tweaks to my application. And then before I go live, I want to come and do it again, just to make sure it's got the current, latest and greatest. Everything's got all the correct questions, it's building the criteria correctly, and we can move forward. If you forget to do that, then it's going to start not matching applicants to specific funding, and then they may lose out. Or they might miss a question that they needed to answer, that sort of thing. And then you have to start releasing sections back to them. So it's very important to make sure to hit that button in the manage and that manage reports, ad hoc reports. So now let's talk about testing. So there's a couple of ways. You always want to test your application before going live. And there's two different ways you can do that. You can make it live by publishing it. Nobody else has access to your application. Nobody's got the link. You've taken the link off of your web page. If they don't know what it is, then they can't get in and start applying. So feel free to go in and test. No issues there. You can just go into the site like I did, and you can start creating an application and testing as an applicant. But maybe you don't want to publish it yet because people have access to your site. You don't want anybody applying. You've unpublished the fund. So remember when I created the fund, I didn't keep it published. So it's unpublished. So there's two things I can do. I can, one, take the link in the fund and email it to myself, and then I can click that link and apply. Or I can use the application invitation. And so anybody who has an applicant account, and you do have to have an applicant account different from your admin account to test, then you can use the application process. And we do have guides on how the application invitation feature works. So I'm just going to do a quick, it's in the notification center, application invitation. So any application that is unpublished but has current dates, current start and end dates, you can invite someone to. If the start date is not within range, so if I had a start date of 1/29, I wouldn't be able to invite myself to this application. Or if I had a deadline date of 1/28, I wouldn't be able to invite myself to this application. It's unpublished, so I don't want anybody else to have access. I'm only going to invite the people I want to have access. So I have an applicant account already, and you do want to test an applicant. It's always best to go in as an applicant and test it. So I'm going to look for my name, and then I have my application invitation process set up that as soon as someone is invited, it automatically starts the application for them. All they have to do then is I just have to let them know it's there. They go to their dashboard and it's in their My Applications. So here I have my application. Here I am. I'm going to invite myself. So I'm going to select my name, put myself over here and hit save. Click OK. And as soon as I do that, it's sending an email to me. It's sending an email to my email address letting me know an application has been started on my behalf and I'm invited to complete it. And then all I have to do then is I have to log on as the applicant, and then it'll be there in my applications tab. I can click on it and continue the application. With my process, I can, as an admin, manage applications. I can go to that and I can see it's already started, and hopefully I've invited them and they are going to go in. So then Christine would log in as Christine, and then she would see that in her My Applications tab. Now, the other thing I talked about, manage application funds, if it's not published, is you can go into the posting fund here. And over here, you're going to see funding opportunities link. I can copy that, put that in my browser, and it'll direct me to that same application as well. And then I can apply to it that way. And then that way you don't have it live, and then you can test an unlive application. Now, once I am ready to turn it over to my applicants, it's always important to go to your fund details and make sure and publish your application form. So once I'm ready, I've tested, everything's good. It's not published right now, so I need to make sure and go in and select this and put it to published over here where it says published, and then make sure it's published, and then all applicants can go and they'll be able to see that. They'll be able to click on it and they'll be able to apply to it. So that's it. That's all we have for you today. I'll see if Maureen has any final questions. It's all yours, Maureen.
Thank you, Christine. Just a few. We already are short on time as of now. It says there's one question that says, is it possible to extend the deadline date for just one fund? No, unfortunately, that cannot be done. If at all, that's a process that you'll have to follow. We suggest have another separate application associated with that one fund only. But you cannot have a separate deadline date for one single fund that's associated or assigned with the current application process. I cannot see the fund contact on my fund setup screen. So there is a small setting on the site settings screen. Christine, can we go to the administration tab? It looks like this is not set up. So basically, Christine is probably referring back to on the fund setup screen. Um, yeah, manage fund application fund screen. There is a contact that can be added. So if we click on edit, yeah, contact, see that? Yeah. So if we scroll down, there is a contact, right? Now this setting is not enabled. If we go to site settings, Christine, we'll just show them how to enable that contact so they can add a contact. And also if they wish to add donors to their funds, that can also be done. Yeah. From the same screen, then we go to site settings. If we go to the fund setup screen, right towards the bottom, yeah, grants fellowship settings. Now there are two settings at the top if you see. If you are interested in having fund donors for your scholarships or your funds, you could enable that. And then there is the enable fund contact. Make sure this is enabled and you should be able to add your contact to the fund. Can I also use, this is the last one, believe me, I've typed in the rest of the questions, so I won't hold you up longer. Can I also use the application invitation to invite a few selected applicants to apply for my application? Yes, you can do that. But as Christine has mentioned, there are certain constraints that you have to remember. The application should not be published. That's the main criteria. Of course, the go live and the deadline dates have to be in the current date range. What you could do is you could unpublish the fund for just a few minutes, send an invitation to the specific applicants that you choose to invite to, send the application invitation, and then publish it once again. So that way your applicants have come in, they start working on the application, and it still goes back live for the rest of your applicants. So those are my questions that I've answered. Anything from your side, Christine, because I'm done? Thank you, everyone.
Nope, I'm done. It's all good. Thank you so much, Maureen. So we'll go ahead and close our session for today. And of course, all the resources of additional information for the items that we covered today are here in the resource section. That'll take you to our Zendesk guides to be able to give you the additional details of the areas that we couldn't go into great detail on today on some of the items that we've covered. And then, of course, at the end is a link to Zendesk. If you'd like to have a meeting with one of our client support specialists, we'd be glad to respond with any questions you have. It's very simple to reach out just by entering a ticket on support on Zendesk and requesting information and requesting a client support specialist reach out to you for a process review to go over your processes. So we thank you everyone for your time today. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you so much and goodbye.